Hello, good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Also greetings to those joining online. สวัสดีตอนเช้านะคะทุกท่าน I think it's good time to start. My name is Suchaya Mokasen, Border Management Program Officer for Thailand at the UNODC. Welcome everyone to the launch of the report, Southeast Asia Opium Survey 2023. Cultivation, Productions and Implication, or in Thai we say the รายงานการสำรวจฝิ่นในเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้ปี 2566 นะคะการปลูกการผลิตและผลกระทบ As we gather here today, we are aware of the profound impact the crisis in Myanmar has had on opium cultivation and production within the country. Last year in 2022, we witnessed for the first time in over 8 years after the military takeover, a significant increase in opium cultivation. Today, UNODC would be presenting a comprehensive report exploring the situation and findings that shed light on the evolving landscape in the middle of challenges of expanding insecurity and instability of the most recent growing season. Also, the report makes a milestone as it examines opium data from Laos PDR for the first time in 8 years. This is a significant addition to our understanding of the dynamics of the region. So what can you expect from the today briefing? So we will not only be analyzing how the situation has evolved, but also offering an analytical outlook on the likely trajectory for opium in the Golden Triangle regions. We believe this information is crucial because it will help us understand the implication of the countries in the region and also the connected drugs market. So briefly about today's program, we'll start with the remarks and followed by a presentation of the major findings of the report. And then we'll go straight to time for questions from everyone here and also online. So without further delay, may I now invite Mr. Jeremy Douglas, UNODC Regional Representative for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, to deliver remarks, please.
Thank you, Chaya. First and foremost, thank you to everybody for being here today, from our diplomatic colleague crowd and also from the journalist community, as well as those that are joining us online. I'd also like to acknowledge our Thai government colleagues that have joined us here today, from Port Pasor, the Office of the Narcotics Control Board, and also the regional governments that are joining us online, as well as the support of the governments of Japan and the United States for this effort. The timing is excellent, as Chaya has just mentioned. There's been profound security dynamic change within the Golden Triangle. We saw last year, we reported in this room the first time an increase in opium poppy cultivation in many, many years. Today we'll report what we found over the past growing season. So the timing is excellent, and you can see a direct correlation to what is taking place within the Golden Triangle to that security situation. So I'll just walk you through very, very quickly the methodology, and I think it's really important for those that are here to appreciate that methodology. It involves an enormous number of people in both Myanmar and in Laos, using some slightly different methods in each, but an enormous team of people on the ground, which I currently have the pleasure of representing, working out of Tonji and Shan State, working out of other parts of Shan State, as well as in northern Laos. Next, please. So basically the methodology that we have is composed of 3 parts. One is an area estimation. The other is a crop yield survey, crop yield meaning how much is produced per hectare. And then there's also a socioeconomic analysis, very brief, but it's in the report as well. Next, please. And initiating this survey, or when we initiate this survey, we start with satellite imagery, which is standard practice around the world, followed by ground verification. And the reason for that is satellites are not perfect. AI can make mistakes. What we tend to do is you take a look at the satellites, you identify the most likely fields based on past production patterns, but also nearby proximity areas, and then we send teams in on the ground to verify what has been found. So you can see up on the upper right-hand side, our team in Shan, and the lower right-hand side, the team in Laos with a helicopter. The reason for the helicopter in Laos is because access to those areas is very, very difficult. There's much better road coverage within Myanmar, road access within Myanmar, which allows us to access the areas without using a helicopter. Next, please. So the teams visited 370 poppy fields individually, including 100 in the villages of East, South, North Shan, and Kachin. So you can get a sense of the coverage areas. So not only do they go in following the satellite imagery, but they do also, once in those areas, they're in and accessing those areas, they basically ask for intelligence from the ground, and then they look at adjoining areas. Next, please. And this is a zoom in on Laos on the left and on the right, and Myanmar on the left, where you can see those areas in some kind of granular detail in the report. Next, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Inshik Sim. Now, Inshik, for those of you who have seen some of his past briefings, is our lead drug analyst here in the region. So he's been coordinating the analysis effort, or the cleanup of the analysis effort, over the course of the past many months. Inshik, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good morning. Thanks for coming over to the Myanmar and Laos Opium Survey Lounge for 2023. So I would like to share some major findings of this year's report. Let me start with Myanmar. So this is a graph on the area of opium cultivation in Myanmar over the last 2 decades, basically. You can see that there has been increases in opium poppy cultivation once again in the country that represent 3 years consecutive increase in the country. So it amounted to 47,100 hectares in 2023, which represent an 18% increase compared to 2022. So basically, since this political instability started with the military takeover in February 2021, we see continuously increases in opium poppy cultivation in Myanmar. In terms of distribution of the opium poppy cultivation in Myanmar, we can see that Shan accounts for largest share, followed by Kachin and Chin and Kayar. Especially South Shan is has the largest opium poppy field within the Shan state, followed by North Shan and East Shan. If you look at the changes in the cultivation, you can see the significant jump in South Shans. So 33% increase in cultivation of opium in South Shans. And also North Shan, you can see is a sizable increase, while the East Shan shows that a 10% decrease, but it is offset with the increases in yield when it comes to production of opium, which I will get to that later. When you look at where this opium is being cultivated inside Myanmar, you can see very interesting patterns. First one is you can see that some of the areas close to border, international border, for instance, between China and Myanmar in Kachin state, you can see that there's high density of opium poppy cultivation is ongoing. And also, if you look at some of the areas close to Special Region 2, Wa, and Special Region 4, Mongla, you can see also some of the high density opium poppy cultivation. Also, when you look at some part east of the Taunji in South Shan, you can see also the high concentration of opium poppy cultivation in Shan state. For this year, we also conducted a first field assessment since 2015 in northern Sagaing. So this is the first time since 2015. We visited 17 poppy fields, our staff visited, and we were able to observe that the size of the opium poppy cultivation in northern Sagaing is amounted to 250 hectares, which is like 5 times increase compared to 2015. But because of the lack of the monitoring in that area, it is quite difficult to establish the trend, but nonetheless, it points out that the necessity of monitoring this area that has not been formally monitored for a long time. This year report, one of the highlights is the again increases in yield of opium poppy cultivation. If you look at it in 2023, the opium yield per hectare is 22.9 kilograms, which is another increase compared to 2022. If you compare with 2021, this represents 65% increase in 2023. So basically, because of the increases in the size of the opium poppy cultivation and also increases in the yield, it resulted in the record amount of opium produced in Myanmar in 2023. One of the reasons why this yield of opium increased in Myanmar is basically the sophisticated farming practices that we observe in both Kachin and Shan state. When you look at the poppy plot, there is an increased density of this poppy, as well as you can see some in the photo as well. There is a well-developed irrigation system, the sprinkler is working, as well as availability of fertilizers. It's observed in Myanmar over the last 2-3 years. Basically, with these changes in the country triggered by this military takeover, has also impacted on the practices of opium cultivation in the country as well. As I mentioned, the amount of opium produced in Myanmar in 2023 reached 1,080 tons, which is the highest since 2001. Basically over the last two decades, this is a record amount. One thing that I want to highlight here is that if you compare in 2001, when there was 1,100 tons of opium were produced, at that time, the size of opium poppy field is over 100,000 hectares. So it was twice larger, even more twice larger than the 2023. But despite of much smaller scale of opium poppy cultivation in 2023, the amount of opium produced in Myanmar is basically equal as compared to 2001. This is again mainly because of the sophisticated farming practices that we observed over the last few years. This is a change in the opium production trends over the last 5 years. You can see the significant jump in Kachin and also South Shan as well. I mentioned earlier that there was a decrease in the area under opium poppy cultivation in East Shan. But because of increases in yield, when you compare the data, when it comes to just production, even that in East Shan, that you can see the increases in the production of opium as well. So altogether, about 900 tons of opium were produced in Shan state, and followed by Kachin state with 153 tons. Another important element for this year Myanmar Opium Survey is the continuously increases in price of this opium. If you look at the farm gate price of dried opium in 2023 in Myanmar is about US $356. This is again 27% increase compared to 2022. So despite the increases in opium produced in Myanmar, the price is also going up. This is quite interesting trend that we see. Basically shows that demand of this opium is very large, which will make these farmers to continuously engage because of incentive of this opium poppy cultivation and associate and expected the economic return. So we also look at the opiate economy in Myanmar. We divide by this basically farmers' cut and also for traffickers' cut, and also some of domestic consumption, the local market in Myanmar of opiate. The biggest share goes to traffickers because the large share belongs to the trafficking of heroin from Myanmar to many different countries in the region. Farmers' cut also increased because of the increases in prices of opium, as well as the amount of opium as well. But nonetheless, it does not translate all into their economic return because of the increases also in inflation as well. Entire opiate economy in Myanmar is estimated between 1 billion to 2.5 billion. It corresponds to around 2 to 4% of the entire GDP of Myanmar. So basically, because of increases in the opium production in the country, the opiate economy in Myanmar is gained a significant importance in the country. This is the geospatial patterns of seizures of opium and heroin. If you look at it, you can see some interesting trends. For those who are interested in the law enforcement action in Myanmar, you can see that there are distinctive patterns between the trafficking route of opium compared to heroins. You can see that National Highway number 3, basically from the north, from Mandalay to connecting to Lashio and Buse, close to China border, you see more of heroin seizures. When it comes to opium, you can see the National Highway number 4, that the cross-cutting between the east and west corridor in Shan State, the connecting Mandalay, East Shan to South Shan. So to recap, so opium cultivation in Myanmar increased once again in 2023, amounting to 47,100 hectares. And also, the amount of opium produced in Myanmar was the largest in 2023 since 2001, with 1,080 tons. And we can see that increasingly sophisticated farming practice in Myanmar over the last few years, that resulting in the record opium yield per hectare, 22.9 kilograms, which is again 65% increase compared to just 2 years ago. We see that the continuously increasing price of dried opium in Myanmar, despite of the increased output of this opium in the country. And lastly, opiate economy in Myanmar gaining significant importance, and now it amounts to US $2.5 billion. As Jeremy earlier mentioned, we also conducted opium survey in Laos for the first time since 2015. This is the result that you can see in the area under opium poppy cultivation in Laos in 2023 was around 5,000 hectares. If you compare to 2014, it's about a slight decrease, but it's not significant change. 5,700 hectares back then. One point that we want to highlight here is that we cannot really establish trend, what exactly happened between 2015 and 2023. It may have showed a similar trajectory that we have observed in Myanmar, the continuous decrease and starting to going up in recent years. It may have happened in Laos, but we can't really say that a trend at the moment. However, it also again shows the importance of continuously monitoring the situation in Lao opium poppy cultivation. When it comes to area under opium poppy cultivation in Laos, Phongsali province, located between China and Vietnam, that shows a higher density and the largest opium poppy field in the country. And we also observed some of the Siang Kong and Hue Sai and those areas, which is close to also international border of this in Laos, that shows a higher density of opium poppy cultivations. When it comes to yield, this is also very interesting. In 2023 in Laos, opium yield per hectare is only 12.7 kilograms, which is basically 10 kilograms less than that of Myanmar. It shows that the farming practices in Laos is not as sophisticated as Myanmar, which is confirmed by our staff in Laos as well. They were not able to observe this irrigation system that we saw in Myanmar, as well as there is no availability of the fertilizer to boost the production in Laos. So there is a very distinct the opium production, opium cultivation practices that we can see between Myanmar and Laos. To recap for Laos, no significant change in opium poppy cultivation in the country if you just compare to 2014 and 2023. And estimated amount of opium in Laos is about 63 tons, which is much, much less than that of Myanmar. It's about just 6% of Myanmar opium being produced in 2023. And also much lower yield compared to Myanmar. And also opium cultivation remains generally less sophisticated farming practices in the country. So I'd like to move on to the implications. What does it mean for us? First of all, we have to understand what's happening both in Myanmar and Laos. Especially in Myanmar, we all know that what's happening in the country since the military takeover in February 2021, and ongoing conflict, governance challenges, worsening economic situations that all have contributed to the increases in opium poppy cultivation and engagement of farming of opium by farmers. And when it comes to Laos, the country is undergoing serious economic situation at the moment because of the high inflation. If you just look at the Lao KIP, they lost their values against US half by half in recent years. So there are many internal factors in these two countries that can further drive opium poppy cultivation by farmers in these two countries. But another very important element is external factor, which is Afghanistan. When you look at it, the latest data was done by UNODC. There was a 95% decrease in both opium cultivation and opium production in Afghanistan. As we all know, that Afghanistan was the leading opium producer and heroin manufacturing at the global level. But now it belongs to Myanmar because of this Taliban ban on opium poppy cultivation. In 2022, we can see the result of that. And Afghanistan has been supplying about 80% of global opiate demand. And we see the price increase in Myanmar over the last few years is already maybe reflective of this shortage of opium. That's why despite of increased opium production, we see maybe the increases in the opium price in Myanmar. So we have to really closely monitor the changes in the Myanmar opium production and then also the price of this commodity. We also look at heroin trafficking and seizures in East and Southeast Asia. Basically, the heroin produced in the Golden Triangle supply the markets in East and Southeast Asia as well as Australia. But when you look at it, the seizures of heroin in 2022 was just amounted to 7 tons. In 2023, according to our estimate, about 96 tons of heroin were produced in the Golden Triangle. So it is, what we want to get to that is the interception rate of this heroin in the region is very, very low, really low. There may have been a change in the trafficking route that have not been detected by the law enforcement authorities. Even you compare with the opium production heroin production in 2022 in the Golden Triangle, it's still very low interception rate when it comes to heroin seizures in East and Southeast Asia. And I want to really highlight that because of the increases in the opium productions and the potential of this heroin, also the converting this opium into heroin for supply into this region, and also as well as other parts of the region, we also really need to monitor how this heroin is being will be trafficked from the Golden Triangle to different parts of the world. So to conclude, basically there has been once again, the increases in opium poppy cultivation and production in Myanmar. And this is largely driven by these increases in yield for opium per hectare in Myanmar, supported by the sophisticated farming practices in the country. It was not the case in Laos, it was only observed in Myanmar. And there are 2 factors. I highlight the internal factors that could further drive up the opium cultivation, and also external factor that we observe in Afghanistan. So all in all, we need to increase our support for farmers because they have all the incentives to engage in opium poppy cultivations. And then second, we also need to closely monitor these heroins trafficked from the Golden Triangle to other parts of the world. So I will leave it at that. I think if there is any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy and Inchik, for interesting major finding. I think now we have plenty good time for questions, and I think we got some couple questions online already. If you agree with me, we'll take these 2 questions online first, and then we'll open the floor for everyone's here. So there's 2 questions from online. The first one: to what extent do you see that the current conflict in northern Myanmar is playing a role in driving these trends? And the second one: what are the implications of the Afghanistan ban now and likely in the near future? Yeah.
Well, two very different questions. When it comes to the conflict and the connection to production, it's quite clear if you look at the areas of conflict or lack of governance and instability in Shan State, you see a direct correlation with the production and the increase in production. That's actually long been the case in the country. We see this in other parts of the world as well, where we see conflict and drug production taking place. But I think that you see it as well in the conflict causing displacement and conflict causing economic instability in the country. And this is, of course, driving people into production because this is an area where an economy where they can make money in a predictable way. And as we see from the opium poppy price that is spiking, we expect more to go into this or to increase their fields, to increase their effort to farm. And that directly takes me into, I guess, the second question, which is what's causing that price spike. It's hard to draw a connection between the two markets. The heroin and the opium from Afghanistan has traditionally dominated the global markets, at least for the last 15 years. But in the Golden Triangle, we've seen it really feeding the regional market. If you look back further in history to the 90s, the Golden Triangle was the global source, or the largest source in the world for heroin. What I think we're seeing now is the early stages of the ban in Afghanistan taking hold, and the price spike occurring as a result of that. And now you're seeing the increase in opium poppy price or opium price in the region. So as Inchik just said very well, we're probably likely looking at more people looking to opium to make an income. And I think it's worth putting a couple of facts out there about Afghanistan as well. The drop in Afghanistan was precipitous. It was massive. It's down to just over 10,000, between 10 and 11,000 hectares in cultivation. So it's basically a fifth of what we're looking at in the Golden Triangle, which is give or take 52,000 hectares. So someone is going to make up that demand. Where there is demand, supply will go, and that's the way the market works. And so we're going to see probably highly likely Golden Triangle heroin going into markets it hasn't gone into for quite some time. And I think we have to remember as well, the traffickers in the Golden Triangle that produce methamphetamine are extremely well connected into global drug markets, as we've seen with the explosion of synthetics in recent years. This is just another product line for them to push into those markets.
Good. All right. Well, that's those two questions setting good scene for our Q&A sessions. Now I'd like to open the floor here to take questions from everyone here. Please.
Yeah, could I ask a question about the survey? So with Wa and Mongla, I take it you're not including those in the survey? And if they were, how much more would that add to the production in Burma? And then also, you note in your income that you're looking at dollars, with the depreciation of the Burmese currency. How much more do you think that's actually leading to the prices that farmers are getting?
Well, you're right. I mean, if you look at, it's one of the challenges of doing a survey inside Myanmar. So we have access countrywide, essentially, at this point for our survey teams, except in special regions 2 and 4, both of which have declared themselves poppy-free quite some time ago. And it is well known that they use farmers across the border, if you want to call it that, of the territory they control and the territory their proxies tend to control, like the SSPP and others, where we see intense poppy cultivation areas, as well as South Shan, where we see now the SSPP has established itself after the conflict that they had with the RCSS earlier this year. So all that to say, there's likely some production in special regions 2 and 4, the extent of which we do not know, and we can't access those areas to verify it. We unfortunately no longer have an office in Pangsang, so that's not an option for us. But it does lead to the logical conclusion that we're going to have some form of engagement with those groups in the near term. to discuss if there is any going on in those areas. But again, they can probably source it from outside in other parts of Shan at this point in time. The other question was on the dollar and the local currency challenges. Definitely this is a hard income earner and a globally important product for drug traffickers, so there will be definitely US or high value currencies playing into the opiate economy in both countries at this point in time. So you'll see, and with the currency drops in both states, and Inchik touched most on Laos, but also we've seen challenges in that regard inside Myanmar. We're going to see highly likely this become an even more important income earner. Of course, they're paid in local currency, but in large amounts of local currency within the country itself. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Second questions?
One question. You mentioned the support from the Wa and Mongla areas for farmers beyond their, quote, borders, unquote. What I'm curious to know is that essentially organized in the sense that this is a UWSA or NDAA sponsored operation, or is this being done by business interests within those two separate areas?
I think it's safe to say it's business interests within those two separate areas, but there's a photograph that Inchik had on the screen which illustrates extremely well what that support looks like to get the production rolling, which is those irrigation systems. They're providing the traffickers, if you and which are often connected with groups you've just described, or elements of those groups, are providing pumps, irrigation systems, and fertilizers, as well as seeds, high quality seeds. And what that is leading to is what we're witnessing now, which is this massive explosion in yield per hectare to extremely high levels that we haven't seen in over 20 years in the Golden Triangle. We don't see that in Laos yet, but as the price spike continues, or if the price continues to rise, it's highly likely we're going to see people pre-financing crops as well there. So that's the term I would use, pre-financing. It's almost like you see with what people do with contract farming in other parts of the Mekong region with other crops. They walk in, they provide the inputs to get their farmers rolling, say that we'll be back at the end of the season to buy the product and then take it away. This is what's now occurring in Shan. So you see that support from those groups directly in those photographs, in fact.
Thank you. Could you kindly use the microphone in the back? Thank you.
Morning. Hi, May Wong from CNA, Singapore Television Station. Got a couple of questions. Jeremy, if you can also touch on the fact that we see a lot of synthetic drugs coming from Myanmar, particularly from Shan State as well, and with this opium production increase in Shan State as well. How concerned are you that this spells a mega recipe for disaster? The other question is for Inchik, if you can just elaborate a little bit about the focus on Sagaing, given the fact that you've not had any data coming out since 2015, and this is also one of the areas that's facing intensified conflicts at the moment. Can you talk about what can we expect coming out from that? And my final question is on Laos. I know that you said that you don't have sufficient data because of the 8-year hiatus. Can you talk about going forward, how concerned are you that this could potentially also increase and become a problem for the region? Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll take the first and turn to Inchik. I think on the does this make the disaster that we're witnessing in the country worse? I'm not sure how it's possible to get worse at the moment, but the point is that it's a contributor to furthering the interests of non-state armed groups or organized crime groups that are incredibly active, as you said, in the synthetic drug trade within the country already. This gives them another product which they can put into their drug trafficking networks and into the markets that they've already been working with for many, many years. So it's definitely going to be a contributor. And we see, I would say you can see with this, it's like other elements of the underground illegal economy within the country. They're all expanding at the moment. And so this is but one part of that. The unique feature of this one is that it's not simply an organized crime issue. Synthetic drugs are much more of an organized crime entity issue. because you don't need many people to produce methamphetamine. You simply need good labs, and you need talent, and you need investment, and you can ship it to the markets. With heroin, it's employing a lot of, or opium is employing a lot of people. So increasingly, it's the employer that people are, or it's an employer for all of these poor farmers, impoverished farmers within the country. So it's really a development, instability, rule of law, and organized crime issue all wrapped up in one. So unfortunately, it's probably, we're looking at, if we look forward, quite a long time horizon for this because more and more people are going to go into this in the near term. And that leads to the next.
For the Sagaing, I think you are absolutely right about the conflict issues in Sagaing. One of the reasons why we also looked at this Sagaing this year was also part of the driven by that factor as well. So I believe that because of the ongoing conflict in Myanmar, whether it's Sagaing or Chin or even Shan, there is much more incentive for farmers to engage in open poppy cultivations. And also because of the worsening economic situation can be observed in Sagaing as well. So there's all the elements can point to possible further increase in the cultivation in Sagaing. That's why we highlighted the need for looking at Sagaing as well. And then in terms of the Lao factor as well, I think Jeremy mentioned already on the because of the increases in the opium price at the global level, especially in Myanmar, we can see that because of shortage of the opium, because of the opium drought in Afghanistan, has all this incentive for farmers to engage more. And the Laos will be, after Myanmar, basically Laos. And the Laos now is 5,000 hectares, but the next year I wouldn't be surprised there will be a further increase in open poppy cultivation.
If I can just add on the Sagaing point, it's a very interesting question because first we hadn't looked at it in many, many years. If you look at what's occurring in just across the border in Northeast India as well, we're starting to see a lot of reports coming out of Northeast India of organized poppy fields. The authorities there are going in to eradicate these fields, but it's very close to what we mapped in our survey as well. And given the conflict in Sagaing, it's one of the areas of the country that's been most challenged by the conflict over the past couple of years, it's likely that would be an area of increase in the next year as well, not just in Shan.
I think this questions from online kind of tag along well with Mei Wong's third questions about Laos. How comprehensive are the data, especially like in Laos, where there was a long gap, and why does Laos look so different? Do you want to elaborate more on that?
Well, we've really, I think, answered that in many ways, but I think honestly, it is half the production level per hectare in Laos, and that really is a reflection of the lack of organization and lack of provision of inputs by traffickers towards Lao farmers, which we anticipate will likely change now given the incentive with the price spike. But so Laos is a developing story, I would say. And the data, unfortunately, we had that 8-year gap. We hope to have much broader coverage of data, if not in the coming growing season or harvest season, in the year after. I must say it's only recently that there's been some international attention shifting back to Laos, which allows us to finance a survey. And it's not an inexpensive exercise, given you have to access the country with a helicopter and teams of people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please proceed to the back of the room and use the microphone there.
Hi there. Lauren Danon with the U.S. Embassy. Great to see you again, Jeremy and Inchak. We were happy to be able to support this project. Thank you for all the work that went into this. I think that the headline that Burma is now the #1 producer of opium poppy is disappointing. But I was hoping you could just give us a little bit more insight into your methodology with Afghanistan, given that I imagine that access is similarly an issue there, and how we're able to determine that there was such a precipitous drop. Because I think that data is extremely important as we're looking forward to potential more spikes in Burma or additional spikes in Laos. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we use a similar methodology to what we do in Myanmar in Afghanistan, in the sense that we use satellite imagery, In Afghanistan, we cover much more of the country, actually, with high resolution satellite imagery, and then we also have teams that go out and do ground verification, as we do in Myanmar. And we're pretty confident. I've actually had a meeting on exactly this very recently with our survey teams from Afghanistan in our headquarters, and they walked us through the findings. And there's a high degree of confidence in those findings, that it's really fallen off a cliff. What does this mean for Myanmar going forward? I think we've started touching on it, and we're seeing that now. It is very, very likely that Myanmar will continue on the upward trend. We're just about to begin the field work in Myanmar which will last into 2024, which will tell us how this is going to go. But again, we're seeing already that what we're seeing with the prices. And our initial reports, we have project staff in Tonji and in Kachin, in Michkina, and they're telling us of fields already. So we know that there's going to be more to come in Myanmar. And again, on the Laos angle, I think it's a developing story, and Laos it's lagging because it didn't have the insecurity issue, but it has the economic hardship issue, and it will start becoming a much, much more significant issue in the future given the price spike. Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, please.
Hello, Gaspar Ruiz from the Spanish News Agency. I would like to ask, I'm curious about when you go to conflict areas in Shan State, for example, some areas are controlled by the Myanmar military, others by armed ethnic groups. To whom do you need to ask for permission when you go to check on the ground? And I would like to know also, you have any information if the Myanmar military or the ethnic groups are involved in any way in opium production or trafficking? Thank you.
Sure. You know, the access issue, it's a good question. We try to operate we're neutral, and we try to operate as an open book in the country. We inform everybody that we're coming. And we don't get pushback really on that. You can see we don't go into special regions 2 and 4, but we don't have people saying, no, you cannot access these areas. Our teams are local. So we have our office in Tonji, but we're employing our survey teams from across Shan State. So these are locally engaged people that we train on the methodology to go in and do a few things. One is to measure the number of poppy heads per square meter. Based on the satellite imagery, they find the fields, they do the measurements, and then they take yield samples from the bulbs themselves to understand how much opium is coming out of those fields. And so they're trained on these methodologies, and then the data is entered and they share it with us. But again, these are locally engaged people with access, speaking the languages and so on and so forth. Now to the second element of that question, which is the involvement of authorities or de facto authorities, the junta or their proxies or the large armed groups and the proxies. It's quite amazing when you go to the country, not one person is involved. That's the story we've heard from everybody for forever. I'm not involved. However, when you look at the data, which is very clear from the mapping about where the high level concentrations are, and you look at who happens to quote unquote control or have de facto control over those same territories, it's very clear that there's involvement by those that have that control or de facto control. And those are groups from across the spectrum of armed groups that are against the junta and armed groups that are for the junta. So or BGFs if you want to use the term, or PMFs. So we have different entities with involvement in different ways. And the buyers that go to the farmers are not the trafficker, the heroin producer and trafficker. These are middlemen that go to the villages and negotiate the price for the opium and then come back, or negotiate the price, come back, pay for it, and take it back to the production labs, which tend to be centered in same areas where the methamphetamine labs are, largely in North Shan State. Again, and you can see who controls the territories where those methamphetamine labs are. The other way that there's benefit from this economically for traffickers or those that control, quote unquote, control territory, be they pro, anti-junta, is through the taxation of the trade as it makes its way out of the places where the production is taking place. And we see this routinely with all of the drug types, and you can see it in the geospatial patterns of the seizures that Inchik and my colleagues map every year. We map thousands of seizures in partnership with the Thai government and their excellent analysts. You can see exactly where these drugs are flowing from and which territory they transect. And then you can see the taxation points. There's choke points on all of the major roads, which are generally under different forms of control by different groups. And there's taxation taking place along those routes, extensive taxation. By the time it gets to the border, it's at a different price than it started at from the heroin lab, as an example. Same is true in methamphetamine and now ketamine recently in the synthetic drug trade. Thank you.
I forgot. So I suppose that now Myanmar is the main supplier of opium in the world. And
it's happened very suddenly, but yeah, that is now the case because the precipitous drop in Afghanistan was very sudden following a ban that was instituted by the de facto authorities in Kabul.
so is it the first time that Myanmar become like a biggest player in the...
No, it was the biggest player in the 90s, by far, actually. It was the largest heroin supplier globally, but we saw this shift away from it as Yaba started taking hold in the Mekong subregion, and then in the past decade, we saw crystal methamphetamine and now more recently other synthetic drugs coming out of the Golden Triangle as major organized crime groups moved operations from other parts of Southeast Asia in partnership with those that control the territory. So we've seen Yaba, followed by crystal meth, more or less surpass the heroin trade and displace it in some respects as the kind of product of choice for the traffickers. But now we have, of course, another product, heroin, which those same networks, many of which found their roots in the heroin trade, can now go back to or add to their product line. So it's easy to imagine where this is going. They can easily distribute it and get it to global markets. And we'll be watching the situation to see if Southeast Asian heroin starts making it further afield than simply Australia and East and Southeast Asia, where it does still dominate. But does it start to get to the United States, or does it start to get to Europe? Let's see. But there is demand there still, despite what we see at the global level of synthetics. There's still demand for heroin.
All right. Looking at the time, I think we can take one or two more questions, if any. Good.
Okay.
All right. Do you want to say anything? No. All right. I think then we come to the end of the event. So thank you very much for your interest in our event and also wonderful participations and questions. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.